Pistons fans, let's discuss the first preseason game, my evaluation of the rookies and the veterans, and overall the assessment of the team. Um, the Killian Hayes, the Sadiq Bey, Saban Lee, Isaiah Stewart, and I guess you could throw in Seiko Nimboya in there. Maybe even Svi Mihailuk. You can throw all those in there as the upcoming young players, and then you got the vets like the Jeremy Grants. Well, you could say the vets. You could say Jeremy Grant, Mason Plumlee, and DeLone Wright, and that tier of players. And then you have the veteran vets, the Blake Griffins, the Derrick Roses of the world, and so you got three different classes or three different levels of from inexperience to experience on this Pistons team. But who is the leader? It's said that Blake Griffin is the leader because he's considered like the best talent per se, and I solely disagree. I personally believe that this team is far greater without Blake Griffin on the team. You know what I'm saying is Blake Griffin is in how I view him is like a Chris Webber type. Chris Webber is not necessarily a Detroit like a Detroit Pistons DNA. He was what he was, and he's from here. I get that, but he's not Detroit Pistons DNA. When you saw Sadiq Bey, Isaiah Stewart play as rookies, you saw the DNA. It just tough. You're not gonna outwork me type toughness. I I say Blake Griffin is in comparison to Chris Webber type because they both are very extremely talented. But it's not hard work when you're just that skill and you're on most nights you are at an advantage to your opposition. There's not their fault that they were, I guess you could say blessed with such abilities and he was to their advantage. But when you have it's almost like having a size disadvantage. You don't have to do as much. So, case in point, if I were to match up Shaquille O'Neal versus Akeem Olajuwon, Shaquille O'Neal don't have a chance. He doesn't have a chance. The reason why Shaquille O'Neal would use his girth or his stature as to his advantage. But when you playing basketball, you're playing a sport, or when you playing a person who's mentally stronger, they use strategic advances as their advantage. So while you're using brawn, they're using their brain. And you could run around a person, they use their brain a lot. They use their brawn a lot. You could run around them like in circles because they can't compute it, what you're doing. So it's like they're 2 seconds too slow. So with that said, when I compare Blake Griffin to Chris Webber, they are extremely talented. However, the Pistons didn't need a Chris Webber. They needed a Rasheed Wallace type of guy. But the point of me saying all that is to say what this team is actually lacking. You got it in two players. It's almost like comparison to having, let's say, I could say three players: Saban Lee, Sadiq Bey, and Isaiah Stewart. That's your Pistons DNA foundation going forward. This team will go as they go. The average fan or whatever occasional fan would say they look at like the talent and build off of that. Like you can see Killian Hayes, you can see Sekou, and they're talented. Or you can go to the veterans. You could say like a Blake Griffin. They're talented. Those are your guys. If I'm building my squad, I'm building a team that you cannot get into their head and win. Like take you I'm a vet. I'm an old school guy. So when I do my comparison, I go old school. So if you were to look at the Fab Five when they was playing against Duke, are they superior to Duke? Athletically, definitely. Why couldn't they beat Duke? Because you couldn't muscle Duke. You couldn't use your brawn to intimidate them. They was mentally strong. You couldn't break them. So the Pistons have always beaten the upper echelon teams based upon that chemistry. The moment that you can get through a Pistons head, you got them. That's why the players like if I were to make another comparison to another sport with the Lions, you can always beat the Lions because you can always get in their head. Every time they will have a coach or a general manager, no, it's not general manager. Every time they have a coach that's developing that mental strength and stability, they get rid of it. And then they go back to something that's less than, that's building that mental strength. But with the Pistons, if they're going to win, if it was up to me, Blake Griffin being traded is an option. If it was truly up to me, Derrick Rose would be my starting point guard. Now, even if he's requesting to come off the bench for whatever his reasons, I don't need him to come off my bench. I need to establish leadership here. Blake Griffin is thrust as the leader because he's the talented player. That's almost equivalent to the Pistons giving the keys to Andre Drummond or giving the keys to Rodney Stuckey. They gave the keys to Rodney Stuckey prematurely because he showed some potential, and I believe in the Eastern Conference Finals when he was playing against Boston, I believe. So they gave him the keys. Next, they're trading Chauncey, and now they're giving him the keys to take over the team, but he haven't done anything. So they did it prematurely. And Andre Drummond, he was clearly like giving you closer to 2020. If, put like this, this is definitely going to make my point. Andre Drummond could have actually been a supreme player if he would have averaged 2020. It's not about the statistics that I'm pointing in on. It's about the effort. When I saw him do it from a game here, and then you skip a few games, and then he'll come back and do it, I say he's not Piston DNA. But somebody was like, well, he grabbing 20 boards, he doing this, he worth his $25 million. He's not Piston DNA. Because that's not who he is every night. He has a talent, ability to get to it. Let's say it this way. Could you match Andre Drummond against Shaquille O'Neal? The question is no. Can you match Ben Wallace against Shaquille O'Neal? You could say, yeah. Can you match Dennis Rodman against Shaquille O'Neal? You would say, yeah. Why? Because those two guys, Ben Wallace and Dennis Rodman, you were not going to get into their head. There was no way you're going to get into their head. They already made up in their mind they're going to outwork you. No matter what you do, they're going to outwork you. So Isaiah Stewart is that guy. I don't see nobody on their team that is, well, change that. Let me change that. In terms of the bigs, I don't see nobody other than Isaiah Stewart being that guy that you're not going to get in his head. He's going to, every possession that he gets, he's going to outwork you. He already predetermined, you're not going to outwork me. They got too many other guys on this team that you can get in their heads. That's why I'm not a favor of Killian Hayes, whatever, being my starting point guard. I'm not a fan of his at all. I mean, I'm not against them drafting him or nothing like that. Whatever, you got it, so you use it. I made a comment to someone's podcast about Killian Hayes that he was Michael Carter Williams 2.0. And when I say that, I'm not knocking him down. I'm saying there was a lot of hype on Michael Carter Williams coming out of draft, and I don't think he was able to live up to that hype. I don't know if Killian Hayes will live up to hype here. Somewhere else, he probably can blossom. Detroit is like this. Detroit is like a pit hole, right? It's full of misery in this pit hole. Every now and again, you get some jewels that fall to the pit, and they're able to bloom and blossom. They grow. You get the Ford Motor Company. You get the Motown music, and then you get what? What else? I believe you could say Barton Cablevision, which ended up turning out to be Infinity and so forth. Yeah, I guess you could say that. Give me something else. So the point, what I'm saying is, most people that are stars or have evolved, they evolved somewhere else. They may have been born here, groomed here, but they blossomed somewhere else. I could look at Killian Hayes and Sekou, the self same thing. It's like when you come, when you come to Detroit, you have to be plugged in already that you're not going to outwork me. It don't matter about the experience. It don't matter about the talent. It's a psychological advantage that they have, and that creates a disadvantage for their opposition. If you look at all four sports, professional sports here, from the Tigers, Red Wings, the Pistons, and the Lions, those that won, they outworked their opposition. If you got Jim Leland and Dabrowski with that team, right? Or you can say Sparky Adamson with that team. They outworked the opponent. That's why they won. Sometimes it's about talent. There is some talent, and whatever, but you have to outwork your opponent here. There's not too many players or people who want to come to Detroit to actually, to give life to the city. Most people come to the city to take the life out of it. In other words, kick the can down the street. Most people, even the residents that's in the city don't give life back to the city. They take the life from the city and they give it other place. It's almost like you have an idea. Instead of you building it here, you take it and go somewhere else. You go overseas, you go to another state and whatever, and you bloom and blossom there. That's how people do it here, because Detroit is it's a weird place to have success at. It's weird. It's not like New Orleans. It's not like Chicago. It's not like these other places that may have, or Washington, or different other places that have like some success economically or professionally, like sports related or whatever. Detroit is weird, and it's almost like the rest of the United States don't want to see Detroit thrive or succeed. So why is that? Why am I saying that is? Because that all plays in a factor of why players play here. The average player that's not drafted, that's signed here as a free agent, or that's traded here. But let's start with those that signed as a free agent. They come here for the money. That means they being out of everybody else. Out of every other team, this team is going to overpay them to get them to come here. So they not coming to pour in life to the city. They come to take the life out of the city, because you have to overpay them to get them to come here. All right. So the average free agent is doing it that way. And it's kind of hard to build off of that when you're taken away from the city. You're taken away from the people. You're not building life to the people. You're taking away from them. But if I were to switch it into those who are traded here, most people that are traded here don't want to come here because there's really nothing here. Detroit requires life to come to the city, because the days of Ford Motor Company being the front runner of, in as far as like a uh, you could say in being innovative, or you could say Motown music. Those two. You could say that what the Fords were, what the 60s, 30s, I mean 40s, 60s, somewhere around there. And you could say Motown came in the late 60s, 60s, whatever. So one was built off the other. But after Motown, what was next? You could say Barton Cablevision, but then he took it and sold it, right? But even with that, that wasn't global. Like it wasn't like international, sort of speak. But then again, maybe it was. If I don't know about being here, being international, but maybe elsewhere it could have been. Well, I mean, what I mean by that is like once he took it out of Detroit and went somewhere else, made it more international. Then it was starting building a headquarters here, making it international elsewhere. Like if you look at the Ford Motor Company, their international company was here, and they branched out from here on out other places. So that's why I believe they're a juggernaut. And in terms of like the Motown music, they built it here, but he took it and moved to California with it. So that destroyed that. Since those two, what do you have here? It's like the city is waiting for that next boom. But every time somebody would create something, they'd take that boom and go somewhere else with it. And they build somewhere else, and then they say, I'm coming back to Detroit to rebuild. But it's kind of hard to do because you're going to have to take the life out of the people. And once you take the life out of the people, you're going to basically going to get the success from somewhere else, because they're going to want what you have, and you're going to take the success and go somewhere else and plant and branch. It's weird, man. It's weird. So with that being said, when you talk about with the Pistons, uh, or with the Lions or any other organizational team, the guys that they get here that you draft. So like you drafted, for example, Isaiah Thomas. You drafted Dennis Rodman. All right. So those guys you drafted, which means is how they are is how they're going to be. There was really nothing established here, but Isaiah Thomas was right up the street from Detroit and Chicago. And he grew up where he grew up tough. So he already had a predetermined mentality. You're not better than me. You're not going to outwork me. He was tough, mentally tough. You can build with that. That's why I was a huge fan of getting Allen Iverson. But at the time when they got Allen Iverson, it was a bit too late. So I look at Derrick Rose in that self-same manner. That's why I say he should start, because his team doesn't have a leader. It does not have a leader on this team. And what I mean by leadership as in mentally tough. And if I were to harp on this for a quick second, this is why I'm not a fan of Matthew Stafford. He is not Detroit DNA. You could put him on the self-same tier as a Grant Hill. You could put him on the self-same tier as who can I use? The Andre Drummonds and so forth. Those type of players there. Now I can't even say Andre Drummond, but I stop at Grant Hill. They may be drafted here, they may be here, but they're not Detroit per se. They may adopt Detroit, but at the same time, they're not. It's like they're not homegrown Detroit. Somebody may say, "Well, Isaiah Thomas is not homegrown Detroit." Like, yeah, actually, he actually is. Chicago is not that much of a distance of a difference from Detroit. They're almost like brothers, so to speak. It's like a mirror, one of the same. In that regard. I I need someone who understands like being around a tough environment. But even in the midst of that tough environment, I'm not going to allow the environment to affect me. I don't believe Matthew Stafford knew anything about a tough environment until he got here. I could be wrong. What he learned in when he was in Texas, I believe he was in Texas, what he could learn there and all that stuff. I don't know. Maybe he learned to enjoy. But that's the same thing will go with Blake Griffin. Same thing will go with somebody said, well, then what about Chris Webber? Chris Webber wasn't really Detroit per se. He was Detroit, but he wasn't Detroit. He was, maybe he was, you just didn't get a chance to see it. I don't, no, he's not Detroit in that assessment of that. When things get hot, he bailed. So I can't get down with that. Jalen Rose is Detroit. Not because he promotes Detroit and so forth. It's like the environment is around him. I knew Jalen Rose when he was a kid, when he, he was related or friends with the people that I knew that whatever. Anyway, so I knew him before he even got playing basketball and all that good stuff. But anyway, he was just around the atmosphere, but he didn't allow the atmosphere to dictate him. Chris Webber is like a sneaky guy. A sneaky guy. Like he doesn't have to do dirty stuff because he was privileged. 2-parent home type deal. He was privileged. You don't have to do anything wrong because you got it good, but you do it for whatever reason. And that's the reason why I can't call him Detroit-esque for my team. He may be a Detroit resident, or whatever. But give me somebody who's been around the atmosphere of it, but didn't allow the atmosphere to affect them. You're talking about a strong person, and that's why I like Derrick Rose to be my leader of this team on the floor in the starting lineup, because I need someone like him to set the tone. Other than him, who do you have setting the tone on this team in terms of being mentally tough? There's nobody on the Lions team. Who do you have that you could say that's mentally tough, that they lived in an environment as a kid all the way up, being around crime, being around drugs, being around violence, being around this, being around that, in home, outside of home, in the neighborhood, outside of whatever. They've been around that, but they didn't allow none of that to influence them. And they don't just come to work and do that. They come to work and you rely on, you think they're good because they're reliable in that regard. But within them, they make a preconceived the standpoint. You're not going to outwork me. Even before the game even tips off or the whistle even blows, whatever, you're not going to outwork me. That's why I like Isaiah Stewart. That's why I like Sadiq Bey. And I'm hearing good things about Saban Lee. I didn't get a chance to see the game. But you could just, certain players, you could just see how they approach it. They approach it like, is it Piston DNA or not? We're talking about in Detroit. We're not talking about being in California or Miami or New York or Chicago or any glamorous team in the States. We're talking about being in Detroit. We're talking about being in a pit hole. We're not booming like we were when the Ford Motor Company was the first hot, they was booming. I mean, not booming like from the small manufacturer, like when they would just boom, like back in, I want to say the 30s to the 50s. Let's say to the 50s. Excuse me. From the 50s on up. Whatever, when they was booming, it was like Detroit was the place to be. It wasn't really, the riots didn't hit. All the turmoil that came with Detroit didn't hit yet. Now, they may have been organized crime and everything else, but the image of Detroit being like this hole wasn't really set there. If it was, I don't know. I don't know about that. But in the 60s, the late 60s, the riots hit and everything else. And then Detroit been like a random target for like national news of being like this lightning rod for this negativity. Every other city and every other state could be doing it. But somehow Detroit is like this target. So I say all that to say, to get a free agent to come here, you're going to basically have to overpay them And when you're overpaying them, you're taking a life out of the city for them to take that life and give it to another city. When you draft a player like Isaiah Stewart or Sadiq Bey, or you can say a Dennis Rodman or Isaiah Thomas, you getting their life into the city. And if you notice how they will revive, talking about very specifically Isaiah Thomas and Dennis Rodman, they revive their energy, revive this city. Now somebody say, what about the Ben Wallace deal? Now Ben Wallace was the guy. He's the template of saying the guy he made in his mind, you're not going to outwork me. He was hungry because he didn't really have anything. He grew around an environment. I believe it was in Alabama. Grew around an environment with his older brothers, whatever, and I'm sure drugs and everything goes around him. But you was not going to get in his head. That's why you can win with him. That's why he can beat Shaq. Because Shaq is privileged. And he uses he used a bullying, his stature as his advantage. But when you can't get into somebody's head, that's not that you can't easily break or intimidate. You can't mess with. That's why you couldn't mess with Hakeem Olajuwon. Talking about Shaq, that is, you couldn't mess with him. There's nothing you can do to him. And let's say this: the Patrick Ewings, the David Robinsons, and you could say the upcoming Shaquille O'Neal were the cream of the crop centers at that time going up against Olajuwon. None of them didn't have a chance against Olajuwon. Now, they all were bigger than Olajuwon, maybe even stronger than him. You weren't going to mess with Olajuwon because you couldn't get into his head. You talk about a guy who did Ramadan and then come out and still play, still play basketball for the four quarters, putting up quadruple doubles and stuff like that. You're talking about a guy who you was not going to get in his head. This is why when you hear Michael Jordan talk about his starting five, he put Olajuwon in his starting five. He said, Magic. Michael is funny. He said his starting five was Magic, himself, Scottie Pippen, James Worthy, and Hakeem Olajuwon. The reason why he put Hakeem Olajuwon over Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Wilt Chamberlain, Shaquille O'Neal, and all the other centers, so-called, is because we were marvel at Hakeem Olajuwon's talent, but his talent was based upon the freedom in his mind. So you got people that will come to him and try to learn how to do his movements and so forth, and that's all in the mind. Your mind has to be free. This is what the Ramadan thing came in at. It's a spiritual thing. You have to be free in your mind to be able to be free in your soul, or your soul to be free. So, and then you can demonstrate that elsewhere. So, but anyway, that's going somewhere else. But I look at it like with the Pistons, what they have going with their four rooks, with the exception of Killian Hayes. I think he's a little bit. New York would love to have him. He would be good in New York. Remember when the Pistons drafted Allen Houston, and they drafted him and Lindsey Hunter at the same time? He didn't do much here at the very beginning of his first year here. He didn't do much. He showed a little flash, but that second year, he kind of took off. It was Grant Hill and him, and they took off, had a nice little tandem. And then all of a sudden, next thing you know, New York is offering him money, and he's going to New York. I think that whole Doug Collins thing, really, I don't know what happened. It took off. It did some things. So it exploded. And exploded in a wrong direction. And so Allen Houston went somewhere else. I believe Allen Houston would have been a far better player here because he was Pistons DNA than he would have been in New York. New York is a place where it's like, as an athlete, it's like entertainment second. Living the life of the glamour of being famous is number one. So a lot of people want to go to the big lights because they still want to be famous. They still want to be recognized, or, all that good stuff. And you're not going to get that here. So I don't see a lot of players coming here that actually going to pour life into the city versus taking life out of the city. That's why I'm not a fan of Blake Griffin being here. Is he a talent? I put him in the same category as a Chris Webber, but I don't see anything else other than that. I can't. I could. Ben Wallace, and Dennis Rodman is my template of my bigs. With you could say with the Bill Laimbeer. Those three are my templates of my bigs, from center to power forward, and even small forward. You can say they set the standard, and then you got my guards. You have Isaiah Joe and Vinny, and then you have Chauncey, and maybe you could throw a Rip in there because you wasn't going to outwork Rip because he was one of the most conditioned athletes, other than I would say Kobe Bryant in his time, that you weren't going to outwork him. He was going to run you whatever. And so those guys that are my template for my backcourt. And the Saban Lees, I don't know what they're going to do with the Sadiq Bey. I don't know if they're going to place him at a 3 or 2. But if he's in the 2, he's in that category too. The only way that I really will accept Killian Hayes is that I have to see that you're not going to outwork me mentality. It doesn't matter about the miscues. It doesn't matter about the mistakes. No matter if you're inexperienced. I want to see that you're not going to outwork me. It doesn't matter about the experience. That's in you. That's a thing. That it just clicks that way. So I'm rambling, of course, and ranting. But I am saying that to say that about the upcoming rookies. And I've heard some things, some interesting things about Saban Lee. My two guys were Isaiah Stewart and Sadiq Bey. When I saw that they drafted them, when somebody said, "Well, why they drafting Isaiah Stewart?" Whatever, like you got to see his effort, And then when they drafted Sadiq Bey, they traded, and you got to see their effort. I didn't know he had a 3-point shot. I didn't know he had I didn't know he had a shot. But I was told that he does, and they said it looks fluid. So I like, all right, okay, that's a bonus. But the Killian Hayes pick, I can pass with that. Even the Sekou pick, I could pass on it. Sekou put me in the mind of a Tayshaun Prince type. Not his ability, not his talent, but how he approaches the game. Tayshaun is not Pistons DNA. He's a guy that he was like a role player, but he's not Piston DNA. If you were to do your Pistons all time, say if you were to give your 10 best Pistons of all time, and this whatever, this DNA Pistons, that is, you're not saying Tayshaun. You can add him on there as like a bonus, but he's not a 10. You're talking about the mentality, the effort, whatever, such as Ben Wallace, Isaiah Thomas, Dennis Rodman, Bill Laimbeer, Joe Dumars, those type of guys. Yeah, matter of fact, you know what? I could say Tayshaun is in the category with a Joe Dumars. And I guess you could say he is Pistons, but he just didn't show it more times than not. When he did show it, it showed up. But it wasn't like that all the time. Like, you're not going to outwork me all the time. He played how he felt. Versus like, it's an on switch that stays on, and he just goes that way. With that being said, we'll close this out. All right, Pistons fans.